The year 1071 stands as a pivotal fracture in the annals of empires. Long before the sands of Manzikert would engulf armies and reshape the destiny of continents, subtle omens of change were already stirring across the Anatolian high plains. For the Byzantine Empire, it should have been a routine year. Another military campaign, a border squabble, a display of imperial dominance. Yet, simmering beneath the surface was a more profound and ancient shift, a collision of two worlds, one fading into twilight, the other surging forward with unstoppable momentum. Before diving into the heart of the story, please consider subscribing to my channel, hitting the like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video to support my efforts in bringing you more compelling content. Your support means the world. Thank you. The Byzantine Empire, once the impenetrable shield of Rome, was a shadow of its former monolithic self. Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes, a man of unwavering resolve on the battlefield, but standing on shaky political ground, desperately sought to unite his fragmented realm into a cohesive force. His adversaries, however, weren't confined to battlefield. They lurked within the silk-lined halls of Constantinople, weaving intricate plots, fostering deep-seated resentments, and patiently awaiting the opportune moment to dethrone him. Even as he mustered armies from the far reaches of the empire, the seeds of treachery had already been sown. In the east, another figure was steadily advancing across the map. Alp Arslan, the Seljuk Sultan. Unlike Romanos, he led a people bound together by a shared faith, an unyielding momentum, and a palpable sense that destiny itself was propelling them westward. The Seljuks were no longer a collection of wandering tribes. They had transformed into a burgeoning empire, characterized by both iron discipline and soaring ambitions. Alp Arslan, a leader both composed and fiercely determined, possessed the keen instincts of a seasoned hunter. He recognized the formidable strength of Byzantines, but he also sensed the underlying fissures beneath their gilded armor. Rather than rushing headlong into battle, he circled cautiously, meticulously assessed the situation, and patiently awaited a critical misstep. The winds that swept across Anatolia that spring carried more than just dust. They carried an air of heightened anticipation. Merchants along the ancient caravan routes whispered tales of Seljuk horsemen moving like specters. Byzantine villagers spoke of imperial armies marching eastward, their banners snapping proudly in the sunlight, their commanders brimming with self-assurance but lacking unity of purpose. Scouts from both sides stealthily navigated the valleys, counting the number of campfires at night, and gauging the other's resolve. Yet the looming conflict was not merely born of hatred or animosity. It was the inevitable consequence of geography, ambition, and the simple, immutable truth that two expanding worlds cannot indefinitely coexist within the same territorial boundaries. For decades, the Seljuks had probed into Armenian territories, seizing strategic fortresses, raiding vulnerable supply lines, and gradually pushing the frontier eastward. The Byzantines responded with counter-campaigns, but these efforts were often disjointed and lacked a cohesive, long-term strategy. The Battle of Manzikert was not a sudden eruption of violence. It was a culmination of a slow-burning fire that was now reaching its explosive climax. When Emperor Romanos embarked on his campaign, his plan was audacious. To thrust deep into Armenia, capture key fortresses, including the strategically important Manzikert, and solidify the eastern flank before directly engaging the Seljuks. It sounded plausible, even heroic, but the empire he commanded was a fragile patchwork. Mercenaries from the far reaches of Germany and France, Armenians torn between unwavering loyalty and deep distrust, and Byzantine generals whose personal ambitions far outweighed their sense of obedience. Discipline varied wildly from one unit to the next, and trust was a scarce commodity. Meanwhile, Alp Arslan had not initially sought a major confrontation. He had been engaged in delicate negotiations with the Fatimids to the south, and did not anticipate such a large-scale Byzantine campaign so soon. When news reached him that Romanos was marching eastward with a colossal army, the Sultan chuckled quietly, not out of arrogance, but with a sense of wry amusement at the sudden and unexpected turn of events. He swiftly abandoned the negotiations, turned northward with remarkable speed, and rallied his formidable horsemen like a massive wave poised to crash. The distance separating the two leaders closed with the inexorable tension of a tightening bowstring. But before swords clashed and arrows darkened the skies, there was an unsettling calm, a palpable sense of uncertainty hanging in the air. Villagers near Lake Van noticed clouds of dust rising on the horizon from two distinct directions. Livestock grew skittish and restless. Markets closed earlier each evening. Travelers shared whispered tales. The emperor himself is approaching. The sultan is riding to meet him. No one knows who will strike first. The terrain surrounding Manzikert possessed a stark and unforgiving nature. Rocky hills, jagged ridges, and sparse vegetation made it exceedingly difficult for large armies to maneuver effectively. The fortress of Manzikert itself stood like a silent, stone sentinel, vigilantly watching both east and west. The Byzantines sought to capture it as a vital staging point, unaware that Alp Arslan was rapidly closing in with a force that could slip through the treacherous terrain like water flowing through open fingers. As Romanos approached Manzikert, he was confident that he held the upper hand. His generals, however, exchanged tense murmurs among themselves. Some questioned the actual strength of the Seljuks. Others harbored doubts about the emperor's judgment. A few whispered treasonous thoughts, remembering the powerful political factions waiting back in Constantinople. And among them, the most dangerous voice belonged to Andronikos Doukas, a man whose loyalty was as fragile as delicate silk and twice as slippery. Still, countless campfires illuminated the night sky as the imperial army rested near the fortress. Romanos walked among the soldiers, speaking with them, offering reassurance, and sharing their meals. He sought to be seen not as a distant and aloof ruler, but as one of them. Yet even he could sense the palpable tension in the air, the unnerving feeling that the enemy was closer than anyone could definitively confirm. Far from the Byzantine camp, on another strategic hillside, the Seljuks also made their preparations. Alp Arslan knelt on the earth before his men, seeking divine guidance and clarity of purpose. His war banners fluttered gently in the night wind. Around him, elite archers meticulously checked their bows, and seasoned horsemen whispered calming words to their steeds. The Seljuks did not fear the Byzantines, but they respected their strength and military prowess. Alp Arslan reminded his warriors, victory is not a gift bestowed by strength alone, but by unwavering discipline and unshakable belief. Two distinct worlds, two powerful leaders, two formidable armies, standing on opposite ridges, separated by only a few days before their inevitable collision. Part 1 concludes not with the thunder of battle, but with a gathering of ominous storms. The very land seemed to be holding its breath in anticipation. No overt violence had yet occurred, but everything was already irrevocably in motion. Fate, like a patient observer, simply waited, biding its time. The sun had barely crested the rugged plateau of Anatolia when Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes emerged from his command tent. Even in the cool morning air, he felt the immense weight of the Byzantine Empire pressing down on his shoulders. The camp was slowly stirring to life. Messengers tightening their belts, soldiers rousing from their sleep, the clatter of cooking pots, the pungent smell of smoke. But beneath this veneer of routine was a palpable undercurrent of unease that the emperor could not ignore. News, both factual and speculative, spread rapidly through military ranks. The Seljuks are nearby, scouts have vanished, a desert wind carries ominous tidings. Yet Romanos resolutely focused his mind, steeling himself against doubt. He was an emperor in a time of war, and indecision was a luxury he simply could not afford. He had led his army deep into Anatolia with a singular purpose: to confront the Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan and to reassert Byzantine authority throughout the east. Too much valuable land had been lost. Too many strategically important cities had been burned. Too many urgent warnings from frontier generals had been dismissed by the imperial court in Constantinople. Romanos firmly believed that he was a man destined to reverse this perilous decline. And so here he was, encamped near Manzikert, a frontier fortress of stone and dust, the gateway to Armenia and the vast eastern marchlands. Still, something felt profoundly wrong. He gazed toward the distant hills, where a faint, brownish haze rose into the sky. It could have been dust stirred up by the relentless wind or by the passage of thousands of horses. His scouts had failed to return from their patrols the previous evening, and their unexplained disappearance gnawed at his resolve. Alp Arslan was known to be swift, unpredictable, capable of melting into the arid landscape and reappearing like a desert phantom. Romanos felt the palpable tension of facing an adversary who threatened not only the empire's borders, but also its delicate balance of power. However, the simmering political tension within his own army posed an even greater danger. As Romanos walked along the lines of assembled troops, he noticed the subtle fractures that ran through the ranks. Units kept to themselves, avoiding mingling. Commanders refrained from exchanging greetings. There were the regular Byzantine tagmata, highly disciplined, loyal soldiers from the heartlands of the empire. But there were also mercenaries, Normans with their rough humor and mercenary ambitions, Franks who fought for coin rather than loyalty, Armenians who knew the land and its hidden dangers, and the Pecheneg, nomadic warriors who rode like lightning, but whose loyalty was as fickle as the wind. And then there was General Andronikos Doukas. Romanos spotted him near a group of officers. Andronikos bowed politely, but his eyes remained unreadable, betraying nothing. The Doukas family harbored deep animosity toward Romanos, and the emperor had no illusions about where Andronikos' true allegiance lay. Yet he could not simply remove the man from command, for he commanded significant forces and wielded considerable influence among the aristocracy. Romanos felt as if he were walking with a knife pressed against his back, waiting for it to strike. The emperor proceeded to the vanguard, where the Armenian commander Philaritos greeted him with a somber expression. "Your Majesty," he said, "something is moving out there." He gestured toward the hills. "My scouts spotted Seljuk riders at dusk. They were not attacking, merely observing us." "Testing us," Romanos murmured, his voice low. "Or surrounding us," Philaritos replied quietly, his eyes filled with concern. Romanos felt constricting tightness in his chest, but he forced calm into his voice. "Tell the men to prepare for movement. We will advance in formation. We will not allow the Seljuks to dictate the rhythm of this campaign." Yet even as he spoke with such outward confidence, he wondered whether it was already too late to exert such control. The enemy seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, a constant, unsettling presence. By midday, the army began its march. The land near Manzikert stretched wide and open, a desolate patchwork of dry grass, thorny bushes, and broken hills. Dust billowed from the boots of thousands of soldiers and the hooves of countless horses, creating a choking haze. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the soldiers' armor gleamed harshly in the unforgiving light. It was then that the first arrow fell, arcing from somewhere beyond the visible horizon. It struck a shield with a sharp clang, causing the men to halt in startled surprise. Then came another arrow and another, isolated, probing shots, not a full-scale attack. The Seljuks were watching, sending a clear warning. As the army pressed forward, a small cavalry detachment emerged from the hills. Turbaned riders on swift horses, their banners fluttering like flames. They approached just close enough to be identified, then wheeled away in a graceful arc, vanishing once again into shimmering heat. "Harassment tactics," muttered Nikephoros Bryennios, one of Romanos' more trusted generals. "They seek to stretch us thin, to fray our nerves." Romanos nodded in agreement. "We will not chase shadows. We must maintain our focus." But his measured restraint was not shared by everyone. Some mercenary leaders grumbled at the lack of action. Some Armenian cavalrymen argued that they should strike first, taking the initiative. And behind Romanos, the Doukas faction waited patiently for the opportune moment to claim that it had acted either too slowly or too recklessly, whichever course of action would inflict the most damage upon him. As afternoon approached, Romanos faced a difficult decision. He ordered the army to divide. One half would secure the fortress of Manzikert, solidifying their position. The other half, under the command of General Joseph Tarkanouts, would move northward to locate the main Seljuk force and engage it. Philaritos looked troubled by this division. "Your Majesty, dividing the army is fraught with danger. The enemy rides in circles around us. We risk losing contact with each other, leaving us vulnerable." Romanos' jaw tightened with determination. "We must secure the fort and force Alp Arslan into a decisive battle. We cannot simply hide behind walls, waiting for them to dictate the terms." But even as he spoke with conviction, a faint doubt gnawed at his thoughts. The enemy seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, an elusive and unsettling presence. As the sun dipped lower toward the horizon, a strange silence fell over the plain. The earlier harassing arrows had ceased. The horses snorted nervously, sensing something amiss. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the inevitable. Then, without warning, the dust on the horizon thickened, obscuring the setting sun. Hundreds of shapes emerged, Seljuk riders, moving like a river of steel and leather, spreading across the land and wide, in circling arcs. They did not charge directly. They encircled, tightening the noose around the Byzantine army. The Byzantine lines tightened instinctively, bracing for the impending onslaught. Romanos rode the front, raising his sword high in the air. Hold the formation. Stand firm. The Seljuks released a volley of arrows. Not a probing shot this time, but a veritable storm of death. The sky darkened for a heartbeat as hundreds of arrows rained down upon the Byzantine ranks. Shields rose in defense. Horses reared in panic. Shouts of pain and fear echoed across the field. And then the riders vanished as quickly as they had appeared, melting back into the landscape like desert phantoms. It was a chilling taste of what was to come, a prelude to the main event. The emperor felt a sudden chill, despite the oppressive heat. The Seljuks were playing with them, toying with their fears, testing their reactions, measuring their discipline. Romanos suddenly realized with grim certainty, this was not the battle itself. This was merely the beginning of a carefully constructed trap. And somewhere beyond the hills, Alp Arslan was watching, patiently waiting, his face etched with a faint smile. The emperor's gamble was now fully underway, and the stakes were nothing less than the future of an empire. The night following the sudden Seljuk encirclement was a time of deep unease for the Byzantine camp. Torches flickered in the wind, casting long, dancing shadows across the tents. Horses snorted nervously, their ears twitching at every sound. The soldiers whispered in hushed tones, fearful of attracting the attention of unseen watchers lurking in the darkness. Every rustle of grass, every distant hoot of an owl sounded like an arrow about to be loosed from the shadows. Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes stood at the edge of the camp, his gaze sweeping across the vast plain bathed in the pale moonlight. He had anticipated tension, but not this kind of suffocating silence. It was as though the Seljuks were not just surrounding the Byzantines, they were slowly squeezing the very spirit out of them. Still no news from Tarquiniotes? Romanos asked, his voice low. General Bryennios shook his head, his face grim. Nothing, your majesty. Not a messenger, not a signal fire. It is as if his entire wing has vanished from the face of the earth. Romanos felt a cold ripple of fear run down his spine. Tarquiniotes commanded some of the empire's best soldiers. For them to disappear without leaving a trace, it was an ominous sign. Either the Seljuks had intercepted them, or something far worse had befallen them. Perhaps the general had decided to retreat on his own, abandoning his post. Romanos could not rule out betrayal, not with the simmering tensions within his army. But he resolutely pushed those thoughts aside, refusing to let them cloud his judgment. The night must be endured, and tomorrow must be faced with a clear and unwavering resolve. As Romanos turned to leave the ridge, he noticed something unusual near the outer perimeter, an extinguished torch lying on the ground. It had been placed at a point where a sentry should have been standing guard. The emperor frowned, his brow furrowed with concern. Where is the watcher station here? Why has this post been abandoned? A nearby soldier hesitated before answering, his eyes darting nervously. My lord, he vanished. No one saw him leave his post. Romanos stared at the soldier, then at the empty post, his mind racing. The realization settled heavily upon him. The Seljuks were not merely watching them from afar. They were actively probing their defenses, pulling at loose threads, testing the morale of the army. A missing sentry here, an intercepted scout there. Small losses, perhaps, but perfectly timed to sow doubt and create an atmosphere of fear. As the emperor returned to his tent, he felt the unsettling sensation of eyes watching him in the darkness, eyes belonging not only to the enemy, but to those within his own ranks. Alliances shifted silently, like grains of sand blown by the unforgiving Anatolian wind. Far from the Byzantine lines, beneath the same watchful moon, Sultan Alp Arslan gazed across the plains from a rocky outcrop. Unlike the Byzantine camp, the Seljuk tents were quiet and organized, their warriors resting calmly, preparing for the coming battle. The Seljuks were nomads of the steppe, born and raised in this harsh landscape. Nights like this were their natural element. Alp Arslan's lieutenants gathered around him, their faces illuminated by the flickering lamplight. Tugsuz, his fierce and trusted commander, spoke first, his voice low and respectful. "My Sultan, the Byzantines are restless. Their lines are stretched thin, their morale waning." "And their emperor?" Alp Arslan asked, his eyes fixed on the distant camp. "Romanos stands tall," Tugsuz replied. "But his officers, they look at him with divided hearts, their loyalty fractured." Alp Arslan smiled faintly, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Then the battle is already half won. Internal discord is a powerful weapon." The Sultan was not a man of reckless fury. He was patient, calculating, and deeply spiritual. He had not come to Anatolia seeking mere glory or plunder. He had offered peace to the Byzantines before the campaign began, seeking a diplomatic resolution. Yet Romanos had refused, choosing instead to push deep into territories under Seljuk influence, challenging their authority. "So be it," Alp Arslan murmured, his voice barely audible. "If the emperor desires battle, I will give him one, but it will be on my terms, in a place of my choosing." He looked again toward the Byzantine fires flickering in the distance, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "They think we are everywhere a constant threat," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, they will believe we are nowhere, an elusive phantom. And that is when the trap will finally close, ensnaring them completely." Morning broke with a cold wind sweeping across the plains, carrying with it the scent of dust and the promise of violence. Dust rose from the ground like a thin veil, obscuring the horizon. Romanos assembled his commanders for a final council, seeking to forge a unified strategy. The mood in the tent was strained, the air thick with apprehension. "We cannot remain in this precarious position," Romanos said, his voice firm and resolute. "We march forward. We will force the Seljuks to fight us openly or withdraw from our lands." Andronikos Doukas stepped forward, his tone polite and measured, but his gaze sharp and unwavering. "Your Majesty, caution is paramount. Our scouts have vanished without a trace. We know nothing of the enemy's true numbers, nor their intentions." Romanos looked steadily at him, his expression unreadable. "If we retreat now, the Seljuks will pursue and harass us all the way back to the Euphrates. The army will collapse in fear and disarray. No, we face them now, while we still have a semblance of order and formation." The council ended with reluctant agreement, the commanders suppressing their doubts. But as the commanders dispersed, Doukas lingered behind, watching Romanos with quiet calculation, his intentions hidden behind a mask of politeness. When the army began to advance, the Seljuks were nowhere to be seen. The plain felt strangely empty, devoid of life. Not a single rider, not a banner, not even a stray arrow disturbed the silence. The unsettling emptiness made the soldiers increasingly uneasy, their nerves on edge. "It feels like marching into a void, a trap with no escape," one of the Armenian officers muttered to his companion. Philaritos narrowed his eyes, his senses alert. "They are hiding, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. We must remain vigilant." Romanos continued leading the center of the formation, urging his troops to keep their ranks tight and maintain discipline. Hours passed, with nothing to break the oppressive silence. Then, from the far right flank, a horn sounded, sharp and distant, shattering the stillness. Before Romanos could react, a storm of arrows flew from behind a distant ridge, arcing through the air like deadly rain. The Seljuks appeared as if conjured from thin air, cresting the hills in a living wave of horsemen, their numbers seemingly endless. "Shields!" Romanos shouted, his voice ringing out across the battlefield. "Protect yourselves." The Byzantines braced themselves for the impact. The Seljuks released a volley of arrows as they rode, circling the Byzantine formation without ever closing in for direct combat. Their horses moved with astonishing speed and agility, their riders bending and twisting in the saddle to shoot at impossible angles, displaying their mastery of horsemanship and archery. Romanos kept the line steady, refusing to be drawn out of his defensive position. "Hold! Do not break formation," he yelled, urging his troops to remain disciplined. But the Seljuks never attacked head-on, preferring their hit-and-run tactics. They struck, retreated, and struck again, harassing the Byzantine flanks like hawks harrying a wounded beast. The dust churn in the wind, blurring vision and stinging eyes, creating a chaotic scene. Confusion spread rapidly along the flanks as the constant barrage of arrows took its toll. On the left wing, the Pecheneg cavalry, never fully loyal to the empire, began to waver, their resolve faltering. "Fall back!" someone shouted in panic. "They are circling behind us, cutting us off." Romanos tried desperately to restore control, but the Seljuks moved too swiftly, too fluidly. Their arrows never ceased, finding any gaps in the Byzantine defenses. Every time the Byzantines attempted to reposition, the Seljuk riders melted away, only to return moments later from another unexpected angle. Tugsa's booming voice echoed across the battlefield, urging his men forward. "Push them. Do not let them breathe. Give them no quarter." The Seljuks tightened the circle, pressing in on the Byzantine forces from all sides. Dust blinded the Byzantine infantry, making it difficult to see or coordinate their movements. Signals were lost in the chaos, communications breaking down. Romanos' center formation remained disciplined, but his wings were beginning to fold, their strength depleted. A lieutenant rode up to him, panting, his face covered in dirt and sweat. "Your Majesty, the left is collapsing. We cannot hold them." Romanos clenched his jaw, his eyes narrowed with determination. "Then we push forward, break through their center, and scatter them." But when he looked for it, there was no discernible Seljuk center, only swirling clouds of riders, swarming and fading like ethereal ghosts. The emperor felt a creeping sense of dread. The enemy was shaping the battlefield as skillfully as a potter shapes clay, molding it to their advantage. Every movement the Byzantines made was anticipated and exploited. And then he saw it, a chilling confirmation of his fears. A distant banner rising above a hill, white, marked with a black lion, the symbol of the Seljuk Sultan, Alp Arslan. The Sultan had finally arrived, his presence a palpable threat, and Romanos realized with terrible clarity. The shadow that had hovered over them since the beginning of the campaign was now standing before them in the flesh. The real battle was about to begin. The moment of truth had arrived, and there would be no turning back from the coming storm. The sun dipped low on the horizon as the Byzantine army struggled to maintain cohesion amidst the relentless Seljuk harassment. Dust clouds rolled across the battlefield, glowing orange under the fading light, as if the earth itself was burning beneath their feet. Romanos, for Diogenes, could feel time slipping away like sand through his fingers. If darkness fell before he secured a breakthrough, the Seljuks would dominate the night, and night belonged to them, not to his heavy infantry. He raised his sword, shouting above the wind, "Push forward! Break the line, or their arrows will finish us before moonrise." But even as he commanded, Romanos saw the truth. There was no line to break. Alp Arslan had dissolved his formations into shifting waves of cavalry, making a decisive engagement impossible. Every time the Byzantines advanced, the mounted archers retreated just out of reach, firing backward with uncanny precision, their arrows finding their mark with deadly accuracy. The closer the empire's troops tried to move, the farther the Seljuks drifted, always circling, always waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Bryennios reached the emperor's side, panting for breath. "Your Majesty, the right flank is losing discipline. The Armenians are exhausted, their numbers dwindling. The Turks press them ceaselessly, giving them no respite." "Tell them to hold," Romanos said, his voice firm despite the growing desperation. "Night will fall soon, and we will have the advantage." Bryennios stared into the distance, his face etched with concern. "That is what I fear, Your Majesty. Night is not our ally on this plain." For Seljuks were creatures of twilight, night riders, desert hunters accustomed to reading the world in the dark, their senses heightened in the darkness. The Byzantines, weighed down by their heavy armor, were foreigners to the night wind, vulnerable and exposed. As the sun's rim touched the hills, a sudden horn blast echoed from the eastern ridge, signaling a change in tactics. Seljuk riders surged from the shadows like a river breaking through a dam. Swift, loud, disciplined, a terrifying spectacle. Their hooves shook the plain, sending tremors through the ground. But they did not charge directly into the Byzantine lines. Instead, they made a wide loop around the formation, firing volleys of arrows that struck the flanks and rear of the Byzantine formation, sowing chaos and confusion. The Empire's soldiers tightened their ranks, raising their shields, but the constant pressure fractured their coordination, creating openings for the Seljuk archers. "This is their plan," Romanos murmured, his voice low with realization. "Bleed us, confuse us, divide us." Another wave of arrows rained down, filling the air with death. Men screamed in agony. Horses collapsed, their legs broken. The circle tightened again, drawing the noose ever tighter. Romanos looked across the battlefield and saw something deeply alarming. The rear guard, led by Andronikos Doukas, had fallen slightly behind, creating a dangerous gap in the formation. Not enough to be immediately obvious, but enough to create a vulnerable point that the Seljuks could exploit. "Signal Doukas," Romanos ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. "Tell him to close the distance. We cannot allow that gap to widen." A messenger galloped toward the rear, carrying the urgent command. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. The gap widened further, the rear guard continuing to lag behind. Romanos felt an icy dread grip his heart, a chilling premonition of disaster. Was it mere incompetence? Or was it deliberate betrayal, a calculated act of treachery? He forced himself to focus on the immediate threat, pushing those unsettling thoughts aside. The center must hold at all costs. If it collapsed, all would be lost. He rode along the line, shouting encouragement to his men, urging them to keep formation despite the storm of arrows slicing through the air. A Seljuk rider swept dangerously close, his eyes filled with hate. Romanos blocked an incoming shot with his shield, then struck down the horseman with a powerful swing of his sword, sending him crashing to the ground. The Emperor's presence steadied the men nearest him, their spirits momentarily lifted. But the Seljuks knew exactly what they were doing, their tactics designed to break the Byzantine will. For every small victory the Byzantines gained, 10 new threats emerged, overwhelming their defenses. The pattern of the battle was no longer chaotic and random. It was methodical, controlled, purposeful, orchestrated by a master strategist. Alp Arslan was weaving a deadly net around the Byzantine army, and Romanos was trapped in the center of it, struggling desperately to break free. At the edge of the battlefield, Alp Arslan observed the unfolding scene from horseback, his face impassive. His white robe fluttered in the wind, a symbol of his authority, though he still refrained from entering direct combat, preferring to command from a distance. His presence alone was enough to signal control and inspire his troops. Tugsas rode up to him, his face grim. "Sultan, their emperor is exposed. He leads bravely, but his rear falters, leaving him vulnerable." Alp Arslan nodded calmly, his eyes never leaving the battle. "Leave the emperor to his fate. His courage is a fire that burns him from within, blinding him to the dangers behind him. Let him chase glory." Tugsas grinned fiercely, understanding the Sultan's plan. The rear guard is pulled away by a bowshot's length, creating a significant gap. "Good," the Sultan replied, a hint of triumph in his voice. "Then the end approaches. The pieces are in place." He raised his arm, pointing toward the struggling Byzantine formation. "Tell the archers to widen the circle, tightening it only when the emperor commits his reserves. We will wait until he believes the moment of victory is near, then we strike the final blow." Back in the Byzantine lines, Romanos saw an opening, small, but undeniably real. A gap in the Seljuk swirling formation, a potential weakness that could be exploited. An illusion, perhaps, designed to lure him into a trap, or a genuine opportunity to turn the tide of battle. If he could force his heavy infantry straight through that seam, he might be able to break the Seljuk encirclement, forcing Alp Arslan to retreat. Might force a negotiation, saving the empire from utter destruction. "Advance!" he ordered, his voice ringing out with renewed hope. "All center units, forward. Now is our chance." Trumpets sounded, signaling the attack. Shields locked together, forming a protective wall. Spears lowered, ready to impale any who dare to stand in their way. The heavy infantry, exhausted but still disciplined, surged forward as one, their momentum carrying them toward the apparent gap in the Seljuk lines. The Seljuks responded instantly, widening their formation, seemingly allowing the Byzantines to move deeper into their ranks. It looked like a retreat, a sign of weakness. "It is working, Your Majesty," a captain shouted, his face filled with elation. "We are breaking through." But Romanos' instincts, sharpened by years of hard-fought campaigns, whispered otherwise, warning him that something was amiss. Why retreat now, when victory seemed within their grasp? Why so easily? Suddenly, from the dust clouds ahead, a lone Seljuk rider rushed forward, approaching the Byzantine lines. Not attacking, but rather delivering a message. He shouted something in Persian, his words lost in the din of battle, then fired an arrow deliberately short, letting it land harmlessly before the emperor. Romanos frowned, puzzled by this strange gesture. He lifted the arrow, examining it closely. Wrapped around the shaft was a small piece of cloth, carefully folded. Bryennios gasped, his face paling with horror. That is an imperial color, Your Majesty. The Doukas family's die. It is a signal." Romanos' heart clenched with a chilling realization. The message was clear, unmistakable. The rear guard, under the command of Andronikos Doukas, had abandoned him, betraying him and the empire. His army was alone, surrounded by enemies. And at that exact moment, Alp Arslan acted, his long-awaited plan now set in motion. A thunderous roar erupted as thousands of Seljuk cavalry formed a massive crescent around the Byzantine army, their numbers overwhelming. The horns resonated across the plain, deep, triumphant, and utterly merciless. The Seljuk crescent formation began its inexorable closure. The previously wide, receding waves of Seljuk riders now collapsed inward, tightening like a vice around the advancing Byzantine center. Suddenly, horsemen materialized from ridges the Byzantines hadn't even registered, unleashing a storm of arrows that rained down from every quarter. The Byzantine advance faltered, then buckled under the onslaught. Panic surged through the ranks. "Hold. Close ranks. Hold the line." Romanos roared, but fear spoke louder than any command. The wings of the army collapsed inward, units breaking and retreating without orders, becoming a flood surging backward. It was at that precise, devastating moment that Andronikos Doukas chose to utterly abandon the field with his rear guard. A soldier, pointing in disbelief, screamed, "The rear guard is fleeing. We've been abandoned." Romanos felt the blow, not of the Seljuk sword, but the crushing weight of betrayal itself. The Seljuks surged forward, their horses crashing into disordered Byzantine lines. Archers unleashed volleys from point-blank range, and lancers struck down men who had already turned to flee. Romanos knew the battle was irrevocably lost, yet he refused to yield the field. "As long as I stand," he murmured, "the empire stands with me." He raised his shield and pressed forward into the chaos. The Seljuks swarmed around him, forming a tightening circle. The trap had sprung, and the emperor was caught within it. The twilight of the Byzantine army had descended. The Seljuk cavalry closed its ring around the center, leaving Romanos for Diogenes almost completely exposed. Dust choked his lungs. The sounds of men struggling, the desperate cries of horses, and the ceaseless whistle of arrows all merged into a chaotic symphony, a terrible orchestration that would be forever etched in the annals of history. Romanos knew escape was impossible. He had desperately hoped to break through the Seljuk lines and regain the initiative. But now, the bitter truth was undeniable. His army had been betrayed from within, and even the bravest soldiers were succumbing to the surging tide of panic. He pressed onward, raising his shield and swinging his sword with desperate strength. Each strike, each parry, was a bold declaration of defiance, a testament to the fact that even in the face of betrayal and utter collapse, a Byzantine emperor could stand proud. Men briefly rallied to his side, inspired by the sight of their sovereign's unwavering courage. But even their numbers dwindled as the Seljuk crescent advanced with terrifying, implacable precision. Suddenly, Romanos caught the glint of a blade in the hands of a Seljuk officer charging directly toward him. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. He met the charge head-on, the clash of steel ringing like a bell in the eerie silence of surrounding fear. He deflected the horse aside and struck the rider down, but a dozen more materialized to take his place. Exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. Sweat, blood, and dust coated every inch of his armor. He risked a glance to the rear, only to see Androniko's Daukas and the remnants of the rear guard disappearing over the distant hills, utterly abandoning the emperor and the center of the army. The betrayal was complete and absolute. At that very moment, Alp Arslan observed the scene from a slight distance, his eyes calm, almost contemplative. Romanos fought with the ferocity of a man possessed. Every action a furious battle against the inevitable. The Seljuk forces, however, moved with the patient, predatory movements of desert hunters, surrounding and isolating their prey. They didn't rush the kill. They understood the profound value of a controlled victory, the power of capturing a sovereign alive, both a priceless prize and a potent message to the Byzantine Empire. Romanos' forces were utterly shattered. The heavy infantry, once the pride of Byzantium, crumbled under the relentless pressure of encroaching horses and the unending storm of arrows. Shields splintered and shattered, men fell in droves, and the surviving few fled in every direction, seeking any means of escape. Romanos remained, steadfastly refusing to abandon his men, even as the circle of Seljuk cavalry constricted around him like a tightening vice. A hand grasped his shoulder. A young officer, barely conscious, whispered, "Your Majesty, they are too many. We cannot hold." Romanos shook his head, his eyes burning with fierce determination. A true emperor does not flee. We will fight until the last man falls. It was then that the Seljuks closed in for the final capture. The emperor's horse reared under the overwhelming pressure. Romanos parried arrows, swung his sword at the surrounding riders, and desperately forced his way through small pockets of resistance. Yet slowly, inevitably, the Byzantines were crushed. He was unhorsed during the final surge, caught beneath the weight of a Seljuk lancer. He struggled against the crushing weight of his armor and overwhelming exhaustion. A hand pulled him upright. Alp Arslan himself approached, not as an enemy consumed by malice, but with a measured, respectful demeanor. Romanos met his gaze, defiance flickering within him despite his desperate situation. "You are Romanos IV Diogenes," Alp Arslan stated, his voice calm and steady, like a desert wind. "You have fought bravely, but this field belongs to us now." Romanos nodded slowly. "I am emperor. I fight for Byzantium. My men, my honor, all of it is here." Alp Arslan studied him for a long moment, then inclined his head slightly. "And for that, you will not die today." Romanos was taken prisoner. His army lay scattered across the plain, many dead, many captured, and some fleeing to the distant hills in desperate escape. The Seljuk victory was complete, but tempered by restraint. They had decisively destroyed the Byzantine field army and captured the emperor, yet they did not lay waste to the surrounding lands. Their triumph was both devastating and disciplined. The immediate consequences were catastrophic for Byzantium. The empire had lost its emperor. Its military leadership was fractured, and its borders were now vulnerable to further incursions. Yet even in the shadows of this disaster, Romanos' courage and unwavering resolve endured as a powerful symbol, a testament to the enduring spirit of Byzantium. He had stood firm when others fled, fought valiantly when others panicked, and maintained his honor in the face of abject betrayal. In the aftermath, Alp Arslan treated his royal prisoner with considerable dignity, understanding that capturing the emperor intact would send a far stronger message than any mass slaughter. Romanos IV would eventually return to Byzantium, but the damage had been done and was irreversible. The empire was shaken to its core, its political structure destabilized, and the power of the Seljuks in Anatolia was irrevocably solidified. Romanos IV's fall at Manzikert will reverberate across the centuries, a stark lesson in loyalty, courage, and the devastating consequences of treachery. The field, now silent except for groans of the wounded and the whispers of the wind, bore witness to the terrible cost of unchecked ambition and the inherent fragility of even the mightiest of empires. And yet, even in that profound devastation, a story remained. one of honor, unwavering courage, and the enduring spirit of a man who, even in crushing defeat, became larger than his failures.